As we begin to change the climate and rainfall patterns change both excessively, as you can see in Kentucky, or become much drier, these headwater systems are going to be among the first harbingers of change.
Welcome to Growing Impact, a podcast by the Institutes of Energy and the Environment at Penn State. Growing Impact explores cutting-edge projects of researchers and scientists who are solving some of the world's most challenging energy and environmental issues. Each project has been funded through an innovative seed grant program that's facilitated through IEE. I'm your host, Kevin Slyman. On this episode of Growing Impact, I speak with Andy Cole, a professor of landscape architecture and ecology and the director of the Ecology Plus Design program. He's a wetland ecologist by training with a wildlife biology background. His research interests lie with restoration ecology as it applies to damaged landscapes, usually wetlands. His seed grant project titled Wetland Hydrology and Plant Community Composition, a reassessment of site conditions a decade later, looks to reinstall instruments on wetland sites that he started measuring nearly 30 years ago. This is to assess hydrologic changes that have occurred due to climate change and other factors. One note for listeners. In this episode, Andy refers to Robert Brooks, a colleague that he worked with for many years. Rob was a professor of geography and a renowned wetland expert at Penn State for nearly 4 decades. Rob died in 2021.
I'd like to welcome Andy Cole to Growing Impact.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that. I'm a wetland ecologist over in the Department of Landscape Architecture, and I like getting my feet wet, but I don't like getting in areas that are too deep.
Could you provide some context and background about your current project?
Sure. This actually goes back almost 30 years. When I first came up to Penn State, I was working with the late Rob Brooks in what was then the Cooperative Wetland Center and then became Riparian. And I came up as a research associate, and Rob gave me the opportunity to look at hydrology at a lot of the sites, which ended up at somewhat over 200 sites, I think. And over time, I ended up instrumenting, I actually lost count, but I think it was well over 60 of those sites, plus some additional sites of my own. It was just to try to get some sense of the behavior of these particular sites, hydrogeomorphic assessments, so that we could be able to predict behavior of a lot of these wetlands just based on sort of where their position in the landscape was and how the water behaved. Nobody had ever really done what Rob and I had proposed to do, which was just to try to generate some data on just basic wetland hydrology. I'm not a hydrologist. I never claimed to be one, and actually got several hydrologists mad at me for what I was doing just because it was classical hydrology. But some of those sites ended up with more than, I think a 12-year run was, maybe 13-year run was the longest I had, which is pretty unusual. Right, because most hydrology studies would be, you do a graduate student, you get to maybe 3 years and you're done. And I had a good run on some of these things. Ultimately, these were all remote instruments. I mean, a lot of this was pre-internet actually, and so I was out visiting them. But they're all remote collecting of data, and I would have to go out and download it on at the time an old calculator. And things just sort of wore out. I ended up moving on to the Department of Landscape Architecture, which I've now been at for quite some time, and Rob and Riparian went in different directions. It just occurred to me fairly recently. I mean, I'm a wetland ecologist by training, and climate change is becoming more and more a thing, and a lot of these sites are up on the ridges, and they're headwater sites. Right. And so as we begin to change the climate and rainfall patterns change both excessively, as you can see in Kentucky, or become much drier, these headwater systems are going to be among the first harbingers of change. And so I thought, well, shoot, I've got, some of these sites that I knew had a long run of data. Can I find some resources to re-instrument them? I put those back in the ground and also started taking plant data. We had taken plant data back in the day. And so and Rob, one of the things that he did really well is he put a lot of that data up on the internet on the riparian site. So I can go back and I can look at what those sites were, at least the dominants, and see what I get now to see whether there's been any change, and to, watch these over a longer period of time again. I mean, my hope is to keep these things going again for, a good amount of time, because if there is a change, if there's a signal, I want to be able to see it.
Why is it important to revisit this research a decade later?
It takes several years actually to get a reliable signal. Right, and especially on some of these sites that are not groundwater fed. The groundwater fed sites, I could probably measure that for a couple of years and feel very confident how they behave. The ones that are more surface water fed or a mix of groundwater and surface water behave very differently, and sometimes it takes years to get a proper signal. And so, coming back in after that period of time, it's going to take us several years to figure out whether there was a change in the signal over time. And the same thing happens with the plants. It's not an immediate thing. Soils could take a century to change if they do change, but the plants, they're going to take more than just the next year, and as will the hydrology. So the whole thing now the climate change is we knew about was coming 10 years ago, but it's sort of in your face now. And it just seemed important to go back onto these sites if I had the opportunity, and try to get them going again and keep them long term, just to see if we can pick that signal up. Because if these things start to dry up or change, that's, in my humble opinion, is one of the canaries in the coal mine, if you will, of problems that are going to start happening in the Appalachians. And again, you see what's going on in Kentucky right now with the flooding. That's the kind of rainfall that we really haven't seen historically and don't want to see. And if that happens on these sites, they are going to change.
Where and how did you choose the placement for these instruments?
The site selection way back when was it was a little bit of a chicken and an egg setting. We were trying to determine how to generate this hydrogeomorphic classification. So at some point we were making best professional judgment guesses about site selection. And then after several years of both the plant and the soil and the water data, we settled on a pretty good classification system. And so I simply went back to some of these sites that were, groundwater fed, a few of them, and a mixture of groundwater and surface water and then surface water. I'm trying to get that spread of hydrology and sites where I had, back in the day, I had a long run of data trying to sort of, a mixture of the HCM classification, a mixture of the sort of the water source, and then just, resources I had available to go re-instrument them. In our classification system, we had what we called riparian depressions. These are groundwater fed, basically little bowl-shaped seeps that are found in the landscape adjacent to streams and just sort of pump out water constantly. Because they're groundwater fed, they are less affected by droughts. I also have some sites that are wetlands that are on slopes, also often groundwater fed, but because they're on a sloping system, gravity will take the water downhill, and they don't stay as wet, and they also get some rainfall and so on. All these sites, of course, get rainfall, and then there's the sites that are that are affected by flooding. So, headwater floodplains, main stem floodplains, depending how you identify those, where their source of water might be sort of groundwater fed from the effect of the stream itself moving up, up into the riparian zone, but also those areas that get flooded. We haven't had a really good snow melt flood in quite some time, but it's those kind of things where they can actually get extremely dry in the summer. And in fact, this summer, I'm sure they are. I haven't been on the sites in a couple months now, but some years they're under 10 feet of water, but most years by this time they're bone dry. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know they're a wetland. to me, just one little addition here. One important aspect to understanding those floodplain sites is that most people will walk those this time of year and will argue with me that they're even a wetland, right? And so these riparian zones, the adjacent rivers and streams, are important in a lot of ways. Buffers, for example, for keeping stuff out of the streams, but they are also important of their own, and that they are a type of wetland that naturally dries out. Those trees don't germinate underwater, right? Those settings have to be dry for the trees to germinate, and then they are adapted to the occasional deep flood, and they are wetland sites. But this time of year, we are in August. This time of year, they are going to be very dry.
How can this information be valuable?
For a guy who likes getting his feet wet, it just has value in and of itself, right? These are some of the more interesting ecological sites I've ever been on. But they are also, to me, especially, I'm going to give you another example, the riparian depressions, especially the ones up on the first and second order streams. I have long believed that a lot of the chemistry that occurs in those streams is influenced greatly by the output of those riparian depressions, being organic matter and all sorts of stuff into the stream, not to mention the base flow itself, right? Again, just naturally this time of year stream flow is low, but these riparian depressions, because they're groundwater fed, keep that stream full, or at least flowing, right? So if you're a fan, for example, of trout fishing and especially brook trout, again, I've never tested this, but I've sort of come to the belief that a lot of these streams that are trout streams are that way, and a lot of the chemistry is that way because of these riparian depressions.
When you do have all this information, from the historical data and the stuff moving forward, who can benefit from the information that you plan to collect and then share out?
The folks that manage these sites, for those that are working in the streams, great, Fish and Boat Commission, of course. In the state and federal level, wetlands are still protected. Now, maybe a little less so than I would prefer. But what we've been able to show is that some of these sites that people may not in the past have thought of as wetlands are now actually classified as wetlands and get that protection. And again, on those riparian zones, whether it's headwater or main stem, keeping those riparian zones protected allows for a lot of benefits, not the least of which is helping Pennsylvania, meet their Chesapeake Bay goals, right? And whether it's a wetland or just I put that in quotes, or just a riparian forest, it is, it's pretty important. So I think this data has, what Rob put together over the years and what this little bit, that I'm following up on, has really helped inform the state and federal managers that have to deal with wetland protection, and giving them additional information on the benefits and why we need to work to keep these sites, even if they're small, which a lot of these sites actually are. They're pretty small.
Do you anticipate, or have you seen this data being used by other researchers, maybe in other studies to forward their work? Right.
So the hydrology data the data itself has not been used, but the approach has been used to help in other areas develop their hydrogeomorphic assessments. And again, the state DEP, Pennsylvania DEP, and the federal EPA have used what Rob and his group over the years have put together to help their plan and how they assess wetlands in the eastern United States. So it really has been sort of behind the scenes, but it's been a real big benefit, I think, to a lot of folks.
Do you have any future plans for this? Any ideas where this might go and where the data might be used, or how you might progress in the project?
Sure. Again, before I retire, I really would like to see whether whether those riparian depressions actually do what I think they do. And so it's not just me. I mean, I'm a plant and water guy, and I need help with the soils and critters, especially in stream and adjacent. So I would like to take, once I get some of the spaceline data over the next couple of years, I'd like to bring some more folks in, especially soil scientists and the folks that work in the streams, because I really want to see if there's that, whether I'm making this up or whether it's really true, how much those those groundwater seeps actually do impact those headwater streams. That's where I'd like to take this.
Thank you, Andy, for spending time on Growing Impact and talking about your research.
Thanks, Kevin. Just anybody who's interested in this, I'm more than happy to answer any emails. I am cac13@psu.edu, and you can always get me to talk about wetlands. Happy to do it.
You've been listening to Growing Impact, a podcast by the Institutes of Energy and the Environment at Penn State. I've been your host, Kevin Slyman. To learn more about IEE and to hear previous episodes of Growing Impact, please visit iee.psu.edu. This has been Season 3, Episode 2. Thank you for listening.